Today's episode, we're going to be talking and understanding a little bit more the mission of the Decon group.
And figuring out a couple of the corridor requirements, so take a listen. You know the worst part of arriving at a hazmat scene?
Trying to find excuses in the summertime as the tech ref to stay inside the air-conditioned rig.
That is masterful, but uncertainty, right? You have no idea what's in the air.
Yeah, this whole assuming it's just the chemical, to be honest with you, it doesn't really cut it anymore. You need answers and you need them fast.
And that's where the Explorer comes in. They have real-time chemical ID and quantification right in the field.
No more just sitting there being like, I don't know, it's probably something bad. This device gives you exactly what's there in exact quantity that exists.
Yeah, and so you can set up your safety zones like an adult and not some rookie that's guessing where to put up the tape.
Which is going to give you defensible, quantitative data in seconds, making your decision-making a whole lot easier.
So no more waiting around for an answer, just solid, life-saving intel.
So if you want to learn more about the Explorer and stop guessing, go to 908devices.com.
And on a hazmat call, the question is never if radiation matters, it's where you're going to find it.
Yeah, and half the time it finds you first, all right? Which is why on almost every unknown, we always have some kind of a radiological detection with us.
Because one of the things is you're not going to see it, you're not going to smell it, you're not going to taste it. And if you miss it, you're probably going to be already inside it.
And if you understand that, you can understand why teams are running the Teledyne FLIR Defense Identifinders.
And this isn't a one-size-fits-all tool. They got a whole handheld RID, wearable personals, and backpack systems.
Which means that whatever task you have on your job, whether you're the first guy walking into a building or you're building out the bigger picture, there's something that's going to fit your job.
And these aren't theory tools. They are out there getting use every day by teams who are actually relying on radiation data to make decisions.
And if you want to learn more about FLIR, and I highly suggest you do, search the FLIR Identifinder. That's FLIR, F-L-I-R, Identifinder.
And don't forget, today's episode is brought to you by Rigaku Analytical Devices, who just launched their 4th generation handheld Raman meter, the Icon X.
Visit rigakuanalytics.com if you want to learn more about their fast, safe, and accurate chemical analyzation.
Okay, we're not doing ads, so hold on. Now we're coming out of ads. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
Hello, everybody out there in podcast land. God, I feel like that's such a crappy, cheesy way to introduce the show. But anyway, boy, we've got a whole hell of a lot of stuff going on, a lot of things to talk about. We are going to continue with our decon, but you know, if for anyone who follows anything that we do, a couple weeks ago we just launched the Haven app, and there have been so many questions that we ended up running a webinar. We had almost 100 people on the webinar at the time that it was done. If you've got any questions on the Haven, you want to know what it's about, you want to see the functions, you want to see the demo, go to the show notes. We've got a link to that that conference that we just did, that online webinar that we just did. That gives a ton of information and a quick walkthrough of the features in and of itself.
Yeah, part 1 of hopefully many, because there was a shitload of questions. Ooh, I said shit. Yeah. Anyway.
It's our show, we can curse.
All right, let's go into...
I hope we can curse, because I've been doing it for the past 11 years, and nobody's fired me from it, so...
All right, we are going to be doing the second part of the Decon corridor, where part 1, we started going through, a bunch of stuff. Go back and listen to it. And then this one, we're going to be talking a little bit more about like designing it, right? Because it's not just slap. I hate to say it, but there's all too many people that just say, okay, I'm just going to throw the tarp down or whatever your methodology is, and that's where it is. And it's not like that. You actually got to kind of think about it. You got to think about the location. You got to think about wind, plume, metering. Like, wait, there's a meter? Yeah, there should be like meters at the decon corridor to make sure situations didn't shift. So there's got to be the decon corridor is I don't want to say this wrong. It is at least as big as the decon corridor is the warm zone. Can it be bigger? Yes. I think it should be. I don't want to say a specific amount of feet, but just understand the decon corridor is going to creep. Right?
Why is it going to creep?
Because you're going to have a little bit of contamination. Does anybody come out of the decon corridor 100% clean? And the answer is no. You get them as close as humanly possible, a Laura, right? And then they go for the final part, which is called a shower. That's what we in normal parlance we call it. So that's pretty much, that's the deal, is that you place it based upon, metering, locations, a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah, well, you need to consider the safe access from the hot zone. And that when you picture your typical hazmat run that you set up decon, you kind of like, well, that's kind of stupid. Like, why do I have to have a safe access? But don't take a small hazmat run. Let's make this a huge hazmat run, right? Where you've got multiple blocks, things like that. When we were doing the Haven webinar, I brought up some of the steam pipe explosions that have happened in Manhattan. That explosion covered multiple blocks. So there was no way for you to just stand in one spot and go, hey, let's put decon over here because I can access it. Well, does that necessarily mean that the guy 2 blocks away is going to be able to access it? And is that decon for the guy 2 blocks away, is that sufficient over here? Or do we have to now start to create multiple decon corridors depending on the size of the location? How do we get to those spots, right? So let's take into account something like the steam explosion, right? In the middle of the road, you've got a giant crater that used to be road and is now asbestos laden everything from under the road. If you're on one side of that hole, essentially, you're not crossing over to the other side. So how are you putting the decon where people can safely access it from wherever they are? And that's got to be well thought out. Again, 90% of the time, it doesn't really matter. Your decon is right there. But when you start having larger incidents, say a rail car incident, right? How am I getting from the hot zone to the decon area? Am I going to be passing other potential hazmats that are not that can't be crisscrossed with each other? How about the weather? How are things going to change? What does it look like to get from one spot to another?
I like that. And then the warm zone, the decon corridor, is pretty much the gatekeeper between getting clean and being cold zone. Right, cold zone. What do they call that? The exclusion zone. They keep changing the names.
They keep changing. Every generation's got a new name for crap.
Whatever. Anyway, so they are kind of like the controlled exit. They have to pass the muster to be able to go and move out of cold into cold, and therefore go to showers or go to communications or whatever it might be.
How about maintaining clear zone separation, right? This is something that is not well thought of, but Bob kind of alluded to it before when he talked about the decon creep, right? As we start to bring people through that are being deconned, well, their gear is being taken off. They're being bagged. Let's assume for a second that we're going to be doing dry decon, which is the decon you really should be doing. And if you're not, well, shame on you. But as I start to do that dry decon, I'm bagging up material and I'm putting it off to the side. Eventually, that bagged up material is going to start to grow, right? My space is going to start to grow. And the last thing I want to do is start to move my decon back into the hot zone. And what else can maintain itself in the hot zone or has the potential to creep into the hot zone are the other technicians that are coming out waiting to be deconned. If you don't set your decon corridor up properly based upon the things we talked about before, like the number of expected people being deconned at any given point in time, you could now have a line of people that start to back up and now they're in the hot zone, low on air, starting to do the vibrate alert. So we want to always kind of, have an idea of how this is going to look at the end, right? I've got 9 different entries by 5 different teams. What does all of that look like when it's done? Do I have enough space in this area to accommodate what that looks like when this is over? Right? We look at environmental conditions as we move on to set up this corridor. Wind direction becomes absolutely tremendous. Not just wind direction because I don't want the hot zone blowing on me. Okay, obviously fine. All right, but now let's take account a city, right? You've got a grid-like street structure, and you can have wind blowing in one direction on one block and blowing in a totally different direction on another block. So how do I want that wind blowing onto the decon corridor in relation to the cold zone? Do I want it at the back and now it's blowing into the cold zone? Or do I want it from the cold zone blowing into the decon zone?
And that could change, just that point right there. That could change over the course of a day.
Oh, yeah, a couple hours.
The hours, right. So another point is natural drainage.
Which is why the Haven app gives you a 4-hour weather prediction. Just going to kind of throw that out there.
Natural drainage. We plan for the best and we try to put out these pools or whatever your methodology is, but there are times where hastiness is going to prevent us from setting up the perfect. What is it? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yep. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
So drainage is important. You got to think about it. You can't be sitting in, where rainwater might accumulate or something like that.
Speaking of rainwater, all right, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I've absolutely seen it happen. And it happened in one of the French, they're not embassies. They start with a C. It's like an embassy, but it's like a downgraded embassy. And surface conditions. 90% of the time we sit there and go, oh, we're outside, we're on this, we're on that. Well, what if you had a hazmat situation on the 18th floor of, say, a French embassy, and your decon was on the floor below? Okay, great, all fine and good. Well, what happens when that decon corridor now gets set up on marble? Because the floor is marble. And now you're starting to do a wet decon on a marble floor, and now people are wet and they're stepping on the marble floor and they're slipping and they're sliding. Or you're having civilians do mass decon through this. Believe it or not, the surface conditions make a big difference. No matter, even our dry decon has the potential to have wet spray all over the place. So really make sure that you're in a non-slip surface, because I've seen people come out from level Bs in the large booties that don't actually fit anybody, and then walk on a slippery surface and slip and fall in the process of that decon. So definitely want to consider your surface conditions.
Another one is lighting. When we train and we're doing our classes, when are you doing your classes? During the day. And so when the first time it's showtime and you pull out and you're like, wait a second, it's 3 a.m. and I'm used to having, a team of people help me do this stuff. You might not. You might have, you might need rigs, lighting, pop-ups. Some of these conferences, you see these like floating orb balls of like, I don't know what the hell you call them, but they're like lighting things that hang up in the air and they float. They're actually pretty cool for this stuff. But lighting's going to be a little bit of a consideration.
Like a mini sun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it spreads light everywhere. They're really, really cool. Weather protection. Now, obviously, if you turn around and go, well, it's raining, like I don't have to protect myself from raining if I'm going through decon. Well, you actually might, right? Because if you're going to implement, say, a hybrid decon, and now you're in the middle of the rain and you're trying to spray on a product that's supposed to sit for X amount of time and it's being washed off by the rain, that's something to consider. And rain isn't the only thing that we consider when we're thinking about weather, right? We set up a decon zone, and what if we've got a nasty thunderstorm coming through, and that nasty thunderstorm is throwing out water in the form of small hard particles that are going to pelt you while you're doing a decon? So I know it sounds ridiculous, but I've seen stuff like this happen. So you're being able to predict the weather, what it's going to do, is just as important as the surface condition, right? We're not doing an analysis every time, but it definitely has to be something that's worth considering. Like, hey, in an hour from now, is this going to be a safe space to stand? Right? You don't want your light coming from lightning while you're being deconned.
One of the other things is, and we program our people to think that there's going to be this natural de-escalation of decon. You're going to go through the cold, the decon, you're going to come out of your gear, you're in the cold zone, and then everybody goes and grabs each other's asses or whatever you do. The thing is that you need to consider that there's going to be people that aren't going to be able to make it to the cold zone, and they might need, medical transport or apparatus that's got to come through or something like that. So at least consider, can you get an ambulance to your decon line, or can you get your decon line to the ambulance? That's a story for another show. That's a way more like, how do you transport a dirty patient? We can talk about that, but that's another day. So
We next want to talk about expansion capabilities. But before we do that, a word from our sponsor. Battery fires, baby.
Yeah.
First, let's talk about battery fires and how battery fires are starting to change how we think about suppression.
Because for years it was water, 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 and then cool it and chase it and hope it stays out.
Yeah, but now we've got, through the glorious magic of lithium-ion batteries, right? We are changing how we look at these things, because it's no longer about controlling it, right? It becomes keeping it from propagating, keeping a reignition cycle from happening.
Which is where some of these newer agents are starting to actually make some sense.
Which is why we've started to look at the TRF Plus from Fire Suppression Solutions. It's one of those products where we don't just turn around and be like, hey, it works and it's going to work on everything, because we're not looking to have it replace everything, but we're looking to understand how it works and when it works, because we want it to be another tool in the toolbox when your traditional playbook doesn't work.
And that is something that can be applied early, help limit the spread, gives you another option, because it's just flooding the thing and just waiting.
Yeah, and depending on how your team operates, they've got different methods for dispersing this. So you need smaller portable operations, they've got it. You need bulk kits because you've got a ton of batteries in your area, they've got that covered as well.
So this isn't just us saying, here's the answer. It's us saying the problem is changing, and this is one of the tools that makes sense for your playbook.
So if you want to look into it a little bit more, go to Fire Suppression Solutions or click on the link in the show notes below and see how TRF can fit into your response model.
And staying in that vein, you know what I love about the city?
Really crispy, thin crust pizza.
E-scooter gangs.
Oh, yes, the scooter gangs. I got to tell you, nothing screams hazmat more than a moped that's ready to go nuclear.
And that's where Obexian FR saves the day again.
It's lightweight, mobile-friendly, and designed for us, the first responder, because the last thing we need is some extra weight while things are starting to heat up.
And it's third-party tested to lower toxic gases below the ideal H levels.
So it's going to give you a little bit of a safety factor when you're putting out that scooter fire.
And if you need more, Obexian FR comes by the pallet or a certified polydrum kit.
Which is perfect when you're sitting there going, holy crap, we're going to need a lot of this.
So protect your team and your lungs. Learn more to go to thehazmatguys.dgeo.com. That's thehazmatguys.dgeo.com.
So we want to talk about the potential for expansion. Now, when you're dealing with a dry decon, that's actually pretty easy, right? To just kind of tack things onto one another. But you need to have the space, you need to have the availability, and you need to have the manpower. Expansion is a lot more than just the physical space. You need the resources, and you got to know the resources are ready and coming for when that expansion is necessary.
Yeah, you're going to need a little bit of extra room for, like, I say this a lot, is that if you have the ability to expand your decon, it should not be a single line. I think we program a lot of people to do that because training, it's like, well, it's easy to just pull out the 3 pools or the single kit, but know that you're probably going to be employing multiple lines for multiple needs, right? The people that are low in air, the people that are very dirty, people that are not so dirty, the people, because there's different speeds at which they go through, and not everybody goes through at the same time. So you're going to need additional stations.
And you got to be ready for additional processes to go in there. What do I mean by that? Okay, so we go in and let's say whatever reason we start setting up a wet decon because the objective requires a wet decon. And then halfway through that objective, the objective changes or another objective is added on. And for the second chemical they're dealing with, a dry decon is the preferred method. Well, where's my space to be able to implement both types of decons at once? And do I have the manpower to be able to pivot quickly from one to another? So you always have to maintain flexibility and understanding that the objective might change halfway through the operation.
Well, one of the big questions is, how would you know that the objectives have changed? And that would be through the Haven app. Okay, enough. Anyway, corridor configuration. You got your personnel flow. We think that it's typically a one-way movement. Could it be two-way? Right? Could people be entering hot zone through warm zone? I know it's not optimal, but there possibly could be. That is the choke point. That is the only way in and out. So I mean, it could share the space. I'm not saying you're going to walk through the stuff, tracking it backwards, but I'm just understand that there might be a way where the warm zone is so close to the access zone that is almost the same area.
Yeah, you say that like it could happen. I don't know. I kind of feel like in the times I've seen, that is generally typically what happens because, you naturally walk out the way that you came in. So if I'm walking out the way I came in and somebody's walking in the way I came in to begin with, now you start to have that kind of that cross traffic. And there's another thing when it comes to personnel flow in which people can accidentally kind of intermingle and get in touch with each other is where is our tool drop, right? We always train that we're like the tool drop is like right in front of the pop-up pool or right in front of the decon spot. Well, if additional people are coming in, they now have to go into that decon line to grab the contaminated tools to then now go into the hot zone. So that comes in play when we're starting to talk about the corridor configuration.
Yeah, and accountability. Though you're going to say this is ridiculous, I have seen countless guys that say, I don't need to decon. I'm just going to go around this thing. And they just, like cats going around water, they just kind of go around it. Or the guy's got his favorite helmet, or, he didn't take his wallet out before he went into the operation, and he knows they're going to confiscate all this stuff. And he's like, I'm not doing it. I'm going around. I'm going to pretend. Accountability is much more important than you think.
It's true. And then from accountability, we get to the station management, right? So we've now controlled the flow of people. They're coming to the station. How do we actually start to manage that station? And entry control is one of the first things that we look at. How are the people going to be funneling in? How are they going to kind of create a line? How can I start to create structure within this chaos of everybody coming out? That all lands within the entry control. Now, one of the things I will say that we never actually have really addressed in the hazmat world during entry control is talking to people, right? As an as a decon supervisor, I'm not getting on the radio talking to the guys that are right in front of me. Yet at the same time, we're both on air. So it becomes really hard to communicate to multiple people at once. And one of the things I've always suggested, and it never came to fruition, but I think is a great idea, is a whiteboard. A whiteboard that you can stand up and write directions for the guys coming in to be able to follow as they go through, so that you're not trying to yell through your respirator and through the sound of what's happening around you to try to direct traffic and tell people what their next steps are going to be. So, want to keep that entry control as tight as possible.
Another one is going to be your equipment drop, or I've seen this multiple different things. I've seen one big bucket where everybody drops everything into it. There might be a bucket for helmets. There might be a bucket for gloves. There might be a bucket for boots. There might be a bucket for tools, meters, all this stuff. Radios. And remember that the reason for this is that the next entry team, as we just said, could it go two ways? Yes, they will, because the entry team's probably going to go to those buckets and pick up the radios, the meters, and all the other jazz, and then go down, because we're not going to keep getting new stuff dirty. And I know we've mentioned this on shows before. If your radio, if you were the first entry team and your radio is marked for entry 1, hazmat 1, well, the second crew that picks it up, they are now going to be transmitting on the radio entry 1, hazmat 1, if you have that dispatch thing where they can read what radio is who. So just understand that radio assignments are going to go sideways on the second entry.
Yeah, and you may turn around and go, oh, well, that's not a problem. I'm just going to use the radio that I have. Well, then understand that by the time the situation's over, you're going to have a lot of units with no radio communications in the cold zone.
Hundreds of radios out.
All of your radios are going to be in a bin. So before you do that, seriously consider the logistics of taking off your radio, handing it to the people at the end of the decon line, so that when they're coming out, they now have a radio, and then you're grabbing the dirty radio and putting it on. Just, it's these minor little logistics things that nobody thinks about during training that end up happening in real life, and these are the things that can really screw up an operation. Now we're going into, from the equipment drop, we go into gross contamination reduction, right? This is generally the first step of any decon, whether it's wet or dry, where we want to remove the bulk of the material. How does that look? How many people do you have there? What is the space that is set up for it? What are you doing with that bulk material when it's removed? Are you throwing it away? Are you throwing it in a pop-up pool? Are you throwing it on the ground? How are you controlling that contamination? All thoughts that need to be thought out.
Once the gross is done, then we go into the technical. And this is where we're kind of focusing on the parts that matter. I'll say that nicely, because I don't really care about how the back of your knee is. That's not a concern for me. No. I'm concerned about where you're giving birth from the suit. So I'm going to focus mainly around zippers, interfaces where skin could come into contact. I'm not really caring about, if the bottom of your ass is clean. Once the suit's off, we'll deal with that afterwards. So technical decon is a station itself.
And that last line you said is, once the suit's off, that's not a throwaway line. That's a thought in and of itself, right? What type of PPE am I wearing? And the logistics of getting that PPE off the person. Perfect example of what I mean by that, there's a totally different procedure for taking somebody out of a level A as there is a level B with an SCBA on. I need additional manpower, or at the very least, additional structures in place for somebody to hold that person's SCBA while I'm cleaning and removing them from the PPE. So the type of PPE that is being taken off comes into play when we're talking about station management, personnel, and resources.
Another one is going to be monitoring. Please don't discount having meters at your decon line. And I'm not saying that we need to do it in the way that you want to keep the decon line where it's safe. If you have migration, if the situation changes, if you're going to need at least, I don't want to say metering, because metering seems to me like it's very offensive and active. I would say it's probably going to be more of a passive and just checking your six kind of thing, where you might not need multiple people to do and go around actively doing it, but you're definitely going to need some type of area monitoring or something like that to make sure that that zone is good.
Right, because the last thing you want to do is start to contaminate the zone and not even realize it. Like we see this with radiation decon. As you're taking suits off of people and you're piling them into an area, you're creating a brand new hot zone. So yeah, that area monitoring is absolutely critical. And then have a plan for medical evaluations. All right. How far do we want those medical evaluations to be? In my mind, a person is out of the suit. We can kind of push that almost into the cold zone area. But you gotta be able to meter and monitor these guys to make sure medically they're good.
I like it. And then rehab. This is a discussion that's probably bigger, and it'd be good to throw on the kitchen table. Is what is a better operation? Is it to get more people in, right? So it comes down to time and dose, right? If you've gone in once and come out, then you have absorbed a certain amount of dose of the chemical or whatever it might be. Is it better to expose more people to keep the dose down per person, or is it more expedient to send me back in for the second one because in my mind's eye, I already know how to fix this?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, that's a serious consideration, right? Because nothing says that person can't take a minute and give a thumbs up that they feel good and go back in. The only reason we generally come out is our air ran out.
Right. So I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm not trying to change people's SOGs. I'm just saying, the quickness of the operation could be, exponentially faster because I already know where I'm going. I'm just swapping cylinders and going back in. Right. So throw that on the table. All right, specialized corridors. All right, what happens if we have to set up something a little bit different? We've done the standard operation, the one we do in training where everybody's coming out, there's no urgency. Well, what if there is urgency? What if there's ambulatory civilians, non-ambulatory civilians, mayday situations? Is that a whole difference? Yes. You might have multiple different decon corridors to address each one of these things.
Yeah. One of the corridors people don't think about is equipment. And now you may sit there and go, wait a second, I've got a separate thing for my equipment. I'm not talking about a separate corridor for your Halligan, right? I'm talking about for actual equipment that ends up being in there, large scale equipment, a pumping operation, the pumps, the hoses, things that need special places to come in and out. An example that comes off the top of my head, and we won't get into the situation, is taking, fire trucks out of a hot zone. How do you do that properly? All things that need to come into consideration.
Yeah, a lot of nooks and crannies in that one. But what if you have evidence, right? And you got to bring evidence to be decontaminated so it can go to the cold zone, so it can be properly tagged and bagged and tested and all this other stuff. There is decontamination techniques for that. There's great sampling classes on that. We happen to offer one of them. And you can learn how to do that because it's a little bit more tricky than you think.